Magical hackers. Yeah. Uh, Mega Man 42. I wish there was like a proper intro to this game so I could like frickin' starting up the playthrough wouldn't be so frickin' awkward. It's, it's not eternal, that's for sure. Uh, and all you really need to know about the story is Dr. Wowie captured, Rush, beat Eddie, and literally all of Mega Man's additional gameplay mechanics. Oh yeah, and Doctor Light, I think, but no, no. But Roll is still around. Anyway, yeah, finally, Mega Man 42. I've been meaning to frickin' get to this one. As per a commenter's request. And also, I don't know, feel like I should explore the game from a slightly different perspective. I don't plan on making like this evaluation thing like a running series. If I ever do this again, it'll probably be on I don't know Mega Man Rocks just because Unum One also requested that. Uh, um, but that's gonna take a while because just like keyboard configurations. The last time I downloaded it were asked backwards. Sometimes it doesn't run properly. I'm just gonna have to find a version that isn't configured like really weirdly for keyboard. Usually the default nowadays is ZX AS to quick switch, arrow keys to move. Um, but I guess whatever, people develop their own configurations convergently. Uh, and the reason I don't plan on making it these evaluation things like like a whole ass series is A, I'd just be copying Nico evaluates, but B, I like to hyperanalyze games that I'm already familiar with and passionate about, which is why I also have a series on Vinog, the Voyanui online game. It's a Lego RPG from 2005 that like two other people have played. So check that out. I'd make more videos if they gained any traction at all, but like I said, super obscure title. It's not really going to gain a lot of views on YouTube. Um, anyway, yeah, created by DJ 2013. That obviously stands for Daniel, different Daniel. Hi, Daniel Jansson this time around. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. Jansson is Swedish. Better known as Servadak. I think his DA account's name is Plagueis or something. He has made other titles. I mean, he has made other games after this, such as Prometheus the Fire Thief, just sort of a Castlevania-esque like game. I'm kind of morbidly curious to buy that actually and see what it's like, see how he's improved if any. Um, but yeah, I'll one of the so I guess I could get into the great slide and charge debate and my take on it because a lot of people are salty just from the fact that this doesn't have the slide and the charge. And of course, his weird stance on it is obviously that he thinks all those additional gameplay mechanics are unnecessary, as his favorite game is one. So he uh, wanted to make a game with all that stripped away. My personal thought on it is like additional gameplay mechanics such as the slide and the charge are welcome within a Mega Man game, if not required, because you can obviously make a good Mega Man game with the slide and the charge, as shown with 4 and 7 and such, and you can make a bad Mega Man game with the slide and the charge. 5 Mega Man at base, I guess, 8. And you can also make a good Mega Man game without the slide and charge, 9 and 10, obviously. Cough, cough. And you can make a bad Mega Man game without the slide and charge, 2. So, yeah, the inclusion of such mechanics isn't really reflective of the overall quality of a game. You can, whether you choose to include them or not, is really dependent on what style of Mega Man you want to depict within a fan game, of course. Um, as long as you make those mechanics work within the game, you balance the stages around having or not having a slot in a charge. And so, like 9 and 10 do this by increasing running speed and shortening the stages somewhat, and not making every enemy have like 20,000 health. Um, and with the slide in the charge, you might want to make the terrain a little more complex and have slightly beefier enemies on occasion, I guess. Anyway, you get the point. Is this game's hate deserved? I guess kind of. It's not a good game. I still stand by the fact that I prefer it over Eternal, although exploring other people's perspectives, I do see why some people like seriously freaking hate this game. Especially uh, so like in Shinryu's case, he played like an earlier version when it came out, in which there are a bunch of BS tight jumps that aren't in the current version of the game, and I didn't experience that. So a lot of people are going to have different opinions on that. Um, and Nico's evaluation on this has some good commentary, but it's like not perfect. There are obviously some moments where he kind of evaluates it blind. He goes over. I mean, he kind of like misses a couple like key points, uh, which is just a caveat of going into a game semi-blind for an evaluation, I guess. And then just develops like trust, like what I call distrust reinforcement, where bad first impressions just make you like paranoid of even worse things going on. Another major thing about the game is obviously that graphics make a game to any casual player. People are gonna look at the graphics and the aesthetics of the game first because they're gonna heavily influence the rest of the game at hand. Um, Obviously, I've freaking mentioned how I don't care how good or bad graphics are as long as they're I give bonus points if they're original, and there's obviously some effort put into them just because I'm an artist and I know how hard fucking Mega Man tile sets are to make. As long as they're original and self-consistent, I'm not too critical about that. In Eternal's case, they're barely original and they lack self-consistency because it's almost like its own freaking style how all the graphics are ripped and developed from like 20 different universes. The game's soundtrack, this game's soundtrack also admittedly kind of freaking sucks, I think. Um, and I guess music also makes the Mega Man game. It really influences like the freaking experience. Um, it would you can tell here and there that it tried to capture the sort of Mega Man 1 soundtrack style, but it doesn't really feel like Manami Matsuma's work, where it's like a simple, memorable melody that's kind of like, you know what I mean? Like, it's usually kind of like dull and makes you want to fall asleep, or just doesn't sound Mega Man like at all. Eh, as for the gameplay, well, at least it doesn't have like 20 different soft locks like Eternal does. Like I literally just found a soft lock in Eternal like a couple days ago, replaying it, where if you defeat Toon Woman on an upper platform and during the weapon get animation, Mega Man clips into the wall and soft locks himself. So this evaluation is kind of me settling a score. I don't think it's like a good game, but I subjectively prefer it over Eternal, and I guess you'll have to see why as we play through it. If I had to play either game forever, it would be Eternal, but just only for ironic enjoyment because I find like a new like soft lock or a glitch or a stupid oversight every time I replay it. Um, I see 42 as kind of like a subpar fan game disguised as a mockery of Mega Man, and Eternal is a mockery of Mega Man disguised as a subpar fan game. I do think like I one of its greatest I think one of 42's greatest conceptual failures is its attempt to parody Mega Man as a franchise. It doesn't really do a lot of deconstruction. There's just a like a satirical uh, there's just sort of a satirical facade here and there for some parts. Like some parts are goofy, some Robot Master names are goofy, but the gameplay is still mostly the same. Like it doesn't try to deconstruct it in that regard. I'd say like a better like deconstruction of Mega Man would be like Magmamal 2's the level that nobody asked for. That's pretty fucking good. If it had like more like gameplay like jabs, I think it would hammer home that concept a lot better. But no, it's just kind of a loose. It's just kind of like a loose love letter to Mega Man 1. This game, and at least it's very consistent in that regard, which is more than I can say about Eternal. How bad? How bad can this possibly get? Okay, I'm gonna. Whoa! Forgot to have the volume up all the way. Jesus Christ. Okay, that's a bit better. Password. At least it can oops. And it boots me back, and I accidentally press start. So you can obviously select your frickin' okay. My volume just spiked again because okay. Forget that ever happened. So yeah, roll is pretty much the same as rock, except she can fire an extra lemon and can dash. There wasn't really any balance put into this. The original rock and roll, am I right? So we're obviously going to be playing as rock. I usually play as rock for like whatever Mega Man game I'm playing. I try to play as the default Mega Man. Just I don't really like playing as other characters and having to master an entirely different moveset. That's just how I play. I like to keep things simple so I can admire like the stage design if it's good. Yeah. But we're gonna start it off with I think I'm actually gonna start off with one that you might be that some people might be frickin' curious about. Sandman. Yeah. The music does kind of make you want to fall asleep. It's kind of a loose, frickin', remix of Lullaby and Goodnight or whatever the fuck. Let's just check the physics. Jumps pretty fucking good. It originally wasn't, but then some rando named Goldwater helped fix the jump. Goldwater DLS. You might not know him, but he appears in like every other frickin' 2013, 2014 era fan game credits. Run seems normal and 3 styled linear, where there isn't like a slipperiness to the end. There are Mega Man 1 spike physics, Ladder climb's kind of slow. Can't really glitch yourself on ladders too heavily. 3 shots spawn max, can mash pretty well. The largest 2 problems with the physics and the engine, oh yeah, other than the occasional nearest neighboring with Mega Man's sprite, as you're seeing here, it kind of jitters.
are obviously the way enemies scroll back, and the knockback is 1.5 times harsher than it normally is in terms of distance. I do kind of like these sleeping cap Mets, though, I guess. They do have a very, like, an annoyingly short activation radius. Like, a lot of people aren't used to Mets having, like, an activation radius of 2. So it's kind of the opposite problem of Eternal. Usually, like I said, 3 or 4 is good. I prefer 3 myself. 5 is too much, and you can see here 2 is a bit like, you have to frickin'... I actually don't mind jumps like this, and this is kind of what I was saying by there's like a disconnect between keyboard players and controller players, because Nico had a hard time with this position, and me, I could just... You can kind of shoot while jumping, like shoot as you rise. But I have a hard time grouping 3 elements together in midair, so whatever. I don't think the position is that terrible. But I guess it's easier to demonstrate here, going back to how enemies scroll. Let me see if I can... Yeah! Yeah! So obviously in Game Maker, in most Game Maker Mega Man fan games that actually do like regular enemies scrolling back, I prefer if enemies scroll back in Mega Man than not scrolling back at all, Eternal. But frickin' how, like, let's say Wrecking Program's engine codes it is that, you know, an enemy is positioned, and when it is killed, it turns invisible, intangible, and goes back to its original position on the map. So that when you go left and you go right again, it reactivates itself. That's sort of the internal, behind-the-scenes Game Maker Studio coding behind scrolling back enemies. I don't know what the actual NES Mega Man coding is. This section is obviously not less than ideal, because you have very little control over... You don't have any control over the bed bouncing, just moving left and right. That's your only source of control. So avoiding damage here is very difficult, and it doesn't feel satisfying. This is one of the weaker stages. Talk about the boss, though. Oh! Saw a power-up zipping through the tile set. This is what I frickin' mean. This is what I frickin' meant when I was rambling in Eternal about specific glitches in specific Mega Man games. And Nico acknowledged this as well. Power-ups zipping through tile sets is kind of a thing privy to Mega Man 1. And so, having this same phenomenon just happen right now feels largely intentional, because this is a giant, like, you know, reference to Mega Man 1. I mean, it takes very heavy influence from Mega Man 1, so having such a glitch, or I guess just an anomaly, feels intentional. It feels like a deliberate implementation, you know? Which is more than I can say about Eternal's glitches. Not every glitch in this game is intentional, though. I'll point out a couple critical errors here and there. Not a bad... I guess this is a giant beak, or a giant blaster on the ground. Kind of a clever enemy. It would have been cooler if it was protected on the outside and it had lower hit points on the inside. And if it was used in fewer stages, it kind of feels like it's just added randomly here and there. This introductory position for it isn't too bad, though. Screw these bouncing guys. I guess they're a lot better in Ombudsman's stage, where you're not bouncing on a bunch of stupid-ass springs. Bed springs. Can't say the stages aren't thematically fitting, I guess. Like, this is very much sleepy time. These Scimitar Joes, I guess I'd call them, aren't too bad of an enemy. You just kind of got to position yourself. They do kind of break the flow of a stage. So they're kind of like slow in that regard, but I don't hate them. I guess it would be kind of cool if like combined with some kind of panic element. So you'd be like being chased after something. I don't know. And then these guys are kind of like, so you're like, yeah, let me in, let me through. Come on, come on, come on! I don't have all day. You know. Like I think that would be a good position for like a good way to use them. Here they're just kind of in your way. There is some strategy to avoiding damage. You do have to kind of position yourself just right. Here's where one of the few parts, like one of the occasional moments where it gets kind of silly and semi-parodic. You got these frickin' tooth fairy enemies throwing slow rotating teeth. Gee willikers, Batman. So spooky. These other blaster placements are kind of like, you can just kind of keep your distance, and they're not really a threat. Kind of a mindless position. I would have put them above the player or below the player. Really anywhere that would, and really any other position would make sense other than just in your way, because you can't really avoid damage that way. They're positioned a lot better in other stages, though. This is a bit of a more interesting position because you kind of gotta jump on the ledge, but not be too impatient about it. And you know, so there's kind of like a peril there. Not really a fan of when you traverse behind a health bar, but that's just me. I don't know. With shots at home in, it makes that particular type of enemy relatively versatile, so this is kind of an interesting position for it. I do approve. I think this health scrolls back sometimes, kinda. Yeah. Depends on... Of course, it's a real problem if you're just going back and forth, you know. There are some enemies where scrolling back and forth and spawning a whole bunch on becomes a problem when the player instinctively wants to run away from an enemy, you know? So, yeah, there's that. Nice health power-up, though, I guess, in that, you know, usually you'll accidentally scroll an enemy back, and it feels largely intentional as like a kind of like a surprise or a punishment. These guys can suck a horse cock. I don't know how I avoided all of that, but I did. That's actually kind of a cool position. The way the blaster is kind of like, oh, you think you're done with it, but then this bitch shows up, you know? Some interesting parts here and there. It kind of... this stage, as you might have noticed, the progression, it kind of repeats the same two moments... Whoa. Kind of repeats the same two moments over and over again. You kind of got like a bouncy bed section, and then you got Scimitar Joes, and then you climb. And then bouncy bed section and Scimitar Joes, and you climb. And then some Tooth Fairies. Yeah, so that's going to be a running problem with the stages. The progression feels a little dead. Again, no deader than Eternal, in which enemies were just placed randomly either way. Again, progression and enemy introduction and difficulty curve are not things like someone new to Mega Man is going to think about when making a level. So, yeah. Mogamen 1 styled, where it's both double doors opening, and then you got the obligatory corridor. Yeah. Let's actually talk about Sandman, though. This was probably Nico's biggest fuck-up within the evaluation. Oh, that was on me. Yeah. Because he was being incredibly stubborn and running forward. But if you actually stop to see how this guy's pattern works... he runs back and forth, and then he's... Whoops. Increasingly likely... Okay, that one was, I think, kind of on me, sorta, question mark. And then he can kind of combo you, I guess. But if you didn't already catch it, even though he doesn't... Fuck. You son of a bitch! But if you didn't already catch it, he only throws the sleeping... Okay. That was both kind of on me and kind of on the pattern. Basically, when he throws the sleeping stand on the ground, there isn't a signal for it, but he only throws it at the center of the room. Kind of like how Elecman only throws thunder beams from specific points of the ground as he's running back and forth. So you can see here, he only does it from the center of the room. So as long as you stick to either edge, you're fine, but then you kind of gotta stick to the center. That is a move I would kind of adjust, because like I'd give like a little more room, like a little more space for the player to prepare for that move. So you can't stay to the left edge of the screen the entire time to avoid the running attack, because he also has this airborne move. So there's kind of sometimes you're forced out of the corner for this particular move. I also think it, you know, again, kind of like Eternal, suffers from, well, you can do a certain move like an unfair amount of times in a row, like, okay. Like, he's just gonna stay here. He's just gonna stay up there forever while jumping, like no tomorrow. Like, come down and face me like a real robot boy, you coward. But, yeah, the pattern is... You can mostly no-damage it reliably. It's not like unfair or anything, it's just a little dull once you do know how to deal with it. And sometimes this air attack, like, he is a bit hard to avoid, like, especially if you're not at the center of the... So it's, I guess, a bit about confidence, because you kind of gotta, after he runs here, you kind of gotta stick to the center of the room, but then you kind of gotta retreat in case he does that. So I guess there's a bit of a fear factor to it, which is kind of cool, but... yeah, otherwise, could have benefited from maybe he could have done this attack on either like corner of the map, or maybe it could have been rebalanced in some way, because it's mostly fair, but not that interesting of a fight. At least you can avoid damage in it. Cough, cough. Another thing I do appreciate about this game are the inclusion of completely new enemy types, and some of the stages were somewhat planned out. So, in lieu of Mega Man 1, almost all the enemies are completely original and exclusive to this game, with sprite work specifically with, like, you know, like the sprite work's completely original, the concepts are, well, you can easily convergently think of like a similar concept for another enemy, or that enemy already existed, functionally speaking, but you know what I mean. I guess, out of the shit and into the fuck. This has got nothing on Rock and Roll's missile, man. Haha, got him, JK. No, not even. But, tangentially speaking, I find it relatively amusing how this technically has more missiles in it than R&R's Missile Man. Like, this actually has something to do with missiles, instead of just a bunch of generic enemy types placed in safe manners. But, yeah. Not a bad opening stretch. Obviously, these frickin' grenadiers, or I guess, like, almost like bomb picket men, obviously throw their grenades really quickly. Feels awkward. And, of course, this buzzsaw enemy's kind of useless. You can kill it from a distance, except when it's placed below you, and you kind of have to time it. But otherwise, it's kind of a useless enemy. It would have been cool if there was some kind of signal for that grenade, because it feels very awkward and kills the flow of a section, because it was otherwise inoffensive beforehand. And then we kind of got like this. Again, some of the layouts change, but like you could oftentimes skip like half of this. Like for this particular level, there's kind of like spaces where you can just completely skip sections. Like it looks like the way the layout's arranged, you're like supposed to jump across that one spine platform and then the other spine platform and then make your way down the right ladder and then jump across and then make your way down the left ladder and then jump across the spikes again and then make your way down, but you can just like skip all of that. You can just drop down to here. So whoops. Even if you drop from that ladder, that's not a bad panic section, I guess. Yeah, this level probably suffers the worst from dead progression and mindless placement. I do like these rail guards, kind of a reference to Fireman stage, and it actually works here because of the Mega Man 1 physics. So even though they're on a separate layer from the tile sets, something I mentioned, like a lot of Game Maker games do, it's not a major problem because you don't really have a slide, so your legs aren't really going to show under the frickin' railing. Yeah, that's like a problem in like Rock Force's Polar Man stage with the snow, and Leaf Man stage and SFR with the grass. People just don't know how to do fucking foreground effects. Not even R&R is immune to that aspect of criticism. Because in the NES games, how they actually did foreground effects is obviously the tiles were on the same layer as everything else, but Mega Man was shoved behind the tiles, and so it was Mega Man that was actually changing layers. You can see this very easily with Pharaoh Man Sand, although the phenomenon happens as early as, yeah, the rails and frickin' Fireman stage. It's a pretty commonplace thing, and not a lot of people pay attention to this. 9 actually emulated that pretty well with the Concrete Man grass and such, but I could talk about this. I could talk about that some other time. Yeah, sometimes we have just frickin' empty screens that kind of transition you from one place to the next, like I guess inspired by Elecman sections. There are some aspects of Mega Man 1 that I wouldn't copy, and that's probably one of them. So originally this extra block wasn't here, so you'd have to make this tight jump. And it was really annoying and repetitive. But now that that tight jump has been fixed, you can kind of just skip this section entirely. That's on me for being impatient, I guess. But, yeah. So I guess to replicate the challenge, it would have been like... Because this space there is a head jump, so... Yeah, I can see why that would be fucking infuriating. I'm glad they were removed, but it does mean you can just skip this entire section. And just go like this. Yep, challenge. Some of these, though, they do make, intentionally or not, a good challenge. It's just, again, a repetition of what we've seen before at the beginning of the stage. Yeah. But, yeah, this stage is kind of a slog, and there's not much to say about it, except for this stretch. I kinda like it, because it has, branching paths with two different types of challenges. You can either, if you take the lower path, then you have to deal with the blasters from above, and if you take this upper path, then you have to deal with the missiles from below. And it feels relatively genuine. So it's kind of like something interesting. Kind of reminds me of like Gemini Man, mixed with like, you know, that one stretch. These guys can suck it. And as you saw, sometimes the arcing projectile doesn't home properly anyway. That's a common thing, you know, like it tries to screen wrap to the closest position. Yeah. Kind of a nothing stage. It kind of stopped after the... It could have been easily condensed. I mean, some of the sections could have been easily condensed, and then other stuff could have been introduced. These enemies, I thought, because they kind of physically look like screw bombers, I thought that they activated on proximity, so I got knocked down here a lot. But no, they're on timers. So... yeah. And normally, boss corridors have 2 screens of enemies. This does have 2 screens, but only one of them has a couple enemies in it, which is kind of weird. Again, Missile Man, not terrible. I always talk about, like, oh yeah. And sometimes he can charge and it kind of feels like it breaks the flow of jumping over the missiles that he dishes out. The other attacks feel... The attacks themselves feel pretty good. Transitioning between them can feel a bit awkward at times. Otherwise, everything is mostly avoidable. Maybe a bit easy. And jumping over a bunch of horizontal projectiles isn't how I like to create boss patterns, but maybe that's just me. I don't like mindlessly hopping over things. And yeah, sometimes you can just charge after launching these, which I'm not a fan of. I'd rather he would just rocket upwards after doing that, because the attacks don't mesh well otherwise. I'm not sure if I got lucky, or if he reliably charges after firing the missiles, and then rockets upwards after firing the missiles, and then alternates back and forth, kind of like a Sheep Man or a Tank Man pattern, or a Strike Man pattern. So that's something I'm going to have to go back and probably check. Otherwise, the pattern isn't too terrible. It's just that one... It's just when he charges forwards after launching the missiles that it becomes a bit awkward. Everything else feels proper, though. He actually chases the player around, which I appreciate. I like it when bosses have some kind of sentience to them. Not bad, just needs a little refinement. Obviously, the sprites could look a lot better. But, like, again, for something made by one person, I mean... So I guess we could do... Let's see, one more frickin' stage. How about a stage where the progression isn't dead, and it actually... This is probably one of 42's best stages, because it keeps itself fairly interesting and visually varied. It knows how to change things up while still feeling fairly designed. This opening stretch could be a lot better because... Whoops. When you're avoiding these bomb guys, you're gonna want to sometimes, like, jump away to avoid the bombs, but then you accidentally scroll back, you know, these frickin' spines. Case in point. So it looks like there are 2 of them when there aren't supposed to be. Well, that kind of screws up the challenge if you accidentally scrolled another one on. And it's worse because those ones are unkillable. Other than that, feels pretty good. This is a nice, like, change of pace. You can kill those from a distance, but you still kind of gotta avoid things. And this is a bit of a chaotic introduction to the thrower, as it's known. But, you know, because it's positioned out of your way, you have time to observe how it works and approach it. Kind of recycles the L ahead ball, and you can see when it's thrown it looks different from the ball he's holding, but I digress. It makes for a very nice panic enemy, I think, the throwers. I do like these kind of like paint slimes, I guess. They're made of paint, I'd imagine. you can kind of just run under them as they hop towards you, and then sort of run away from them. Ow. There is thankfully a spawn max to the slimes, but there is sadly not a spawn max to the miniature ones. So you can basically shoot a whole bunch of miniatures all day, but there'll only be 3 of these slimes on the screen at once. Doesn't go past that. You see 3 of them, and there won't be any more than that. What? And again, I do like, so like for this stage in particular, you've seen so far how like just simple scenery changes make the stage feel like it's actually progressing. So we started off kind of in the trees, I guess, which would be a nice place to like paint some nature or some shit. And then here we actually come across a bunch of like paint buckets and stuff, and it's higher up. So it actually feels like a completely different section, and the different enemy types actually reflect that, you know? The stages don't always like reflect like or emulate like AK positioning, but like you'd kind of have to read his interview to even know that. So whatever. Not a bad transitioning screen. That's kind of a more challenging position for them, and there are more spikes now, so I approve of sort of repeating this. It would be cooler if, you know, the slimes actually died to the spikes, or split on the spikes, at least. But otherwise, not another bad repetition, because it feels more difficult, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. I guess this thrower doesn't really pose a challenge unless you're like dropping down and you're impatient, but not bad. There used to be a 1-up down here. It's blocked off by this pillar now, but it used to be down there, I guess. I don't know how you'd even... I believe that would be a trap, because it would be incredibly difficult to missile launch back up there. Yeah, that's... Forgot to mention why I got this weapon to begin with. The weapons in this game are really freaking good. I do think some of them are imbalanced once again, but... Go to sleep. And I do like how they have, like, frickin' sleeping sprites. And if they're flying, they just drop down. So I do like little details like that. And enemies that feel immune, you would expect them to get destroyed by a giant frickin' missile. So I'm glad that was implemented. So, here... Yeah, launch missile doubles as an item too. I think it would have been cooler if the game had like one bonus utility, kind of like a magnet beam kind of a thing. Not like a bunch of items, but just like maybe like one. Like I think like carry from Game Boy 1 would be like a cool thing to add. I think it would be one like. But making one of the weapons a utility, I guess, isn't too bad of a compromise. So obviously the spines have been returning, but now with the additional different context of these sort of flying seekers, making a different type of challenge. So that feels justified. And now the bomb-dropping guys come back, but combined, again, with a different type of enemy to create a different type of challenge. Now it's more of a panic challenge, because you have to kill the throwers in time before they launch a bunch of balls at you. So you're avoiding these guys, but then you also have to think fast and kill that. In fact, this section could have had a few extra pits and gone on a bit longer as like a final hurrah as a climax, but otherwise that was a pretty good enemy-centric stage. And yeah, I could do without corridors, but they are a nice aesthetic touch if nothing else. This is probably the weakest boss fight. I mean that both pattern-wise and literally. The obligatory cut man receiving extra damage. He runs, drops Paint Glob, and then repeats the same thing, but he jumps after running. So he runs, and then he jump runs. And then he runs, and then he jump runs. And that's the pattern. And you can kind of just damage race him before he can even pose a threat. And because these stay on the ground for a decent amount of time, if you can just paint it up pretty quickly, and you can double KO if you're stupid enough. Usually double KOs don't pose a problem, but we'll get to that later. But yeah, excellent, kind of the reverse of Missile Man. Excellent, well, decent, passable stage. Lame pattern. There could have been a lot more done with the concept of leaving a bunch of stuff on the ground, and there's a bunch of just open space above the player. Like the floor didn't need to be that like near the bottom of the screen. Like there could have just been a bit of extra scenery, but instead there's just an open, empty ceiling, and you'd think the fight would do something with that, but it doesn't. So yeah. He just runs back and forth, and then the unexpected jump every second cycle feels a bit awkward. You kind of just got to jump over him before he does that if you want to properly avoid damage. Really not that good of a fight. The others so far have been somewhat promising, though, so we'll get to that later. But I think that wraps it up. Gotta make sure not to forget the password, because this game only frickin' saves via password. If you accidentally press continue and you didn't want to do any more stages, go fuck yourself. There isn't like a way to go back to the password and check. So that's kind of annoying. But I guess because they're, NES length stages for the most part, backtracking isn't too much of a pain. But yeah, I think the stages themselves were kind of like mapped out, and the screen count was planned in advance, which is another thing I can commend. Like there was some actual planning put into the stages. I think the positioning is just a little, not as mindless as Eternal, but there isn't like a progression to anything. It kind of repeats itself. We'll get into some of the more egregious problems with the game as we tackle the later stages, but that does it for this episode, I think. Yeah. Until next time, this is Lava Man, signing off.